It is the tale of a K-shaped economy.
Better growth in 2026.
Tens of thousands of jobs permanently lost.
Stagflation light.
It's been a wonderful year for investors.
Tariffs. Lower GDP.
Profit margins high for companies.
Massive job losses and layoffs.
Wealthy households are spending.
Warning sign.
Equities of the beneficiary.
Hire less people.
Higher unemployment.
Mass layoffs.
Economic growth.
Mass corporate layoffs.
Stock market is booming.
Stagflation.
Tariffs. Inflation.
U.S. tariffs. Stagflation.
Tariffs. K-shaped economy.
K-shaped economy issue.
The K-shaped economy.
K-shaped economy.
Is the Great Divide sustainable?
There's something missing from today's economic narrative that is shaping how people think about the economy, a risk that is in plain view but not incorporated into how we think about this moment. We hear about a K-shaped economy where the haves are headed on an upward trajectory while the have-nots are headed in the opposite direction. That's bad enough, but it's not a K, it's a three-legged stool, with AI providing the third leg, and everyone knows the risks of a three-legged stool. If just one leg fails, they all fail. The top of the K is made up of the people who benefit from the stock market's continued rise, the asset-holding class who continue to increase their spending and their wealth. The bottom of the K is made up of most of the workforce, the folks living paycheck to paycheck who have no confidence in the economy today and are reaching a breaking point. And the AI leg? It's a confidence game that requires its big bets and promises to pay off, and soon. And that one leg is currently propping up the entire stock market and the top of the K-shaped economy. Trillions of dollars are being bet on AI to create the illusion of economic growth. They may not want to call it a bubble yet, but if it inflates like a bubble and shimmers thinly like a bubble, well, your retirement account needs it to be more than an illusion. The CEOs and billionaires need it to be more than an illusion. But this leg is hollow, and no one has proven they can stabilize it yet. So what happens if the bubble bursts and one of those legs snaps? Welcome to Acceptance Criteria, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of how software gets made and how we can all do a better job together. My name is Kevin Thomas Euland. Across the chat from me is Andrew Greener. Say hi, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. We're also here to get deeper on the human element. I could go on for an eternity about people and how they think about the process of building complex systems. And I can't think of two better people to do that than Kevin and I.
At least until AI can replace us. I see you, Google Notebook. On this week's show, we'll dig into the latest buzzword I'm sure folks have seen flying around, the K-shaped economy. We're not convinced it's the right metaphor for the moment, and we'll talk about what that means for the tech sector in particular, as AI seems to be propping up the economy in a way that is frankly terrifying. We're going to walk through a lot of stats and concerning trends. I promise it's all leading somewhere, so hang in there with us. And if you want to come watch on YouTube, we've got graphs and graphics to follow along. So I think I want to talk about why it feels this way, right? Like everything is either the top of the chart here of the economy is great, the S&P rose by double digits in 2025, GDP is growing, that's projected to be around 2.2% last year. And I think the problem I have is the top, everything, all of the rosy, glowing economic news of what's going on in the world. And yet also, it does sort of seem like every day the bottom here of we're struggling, consumer sentiment is all-time low, and it does feel like just more and more stories start to pile up. And I feel like the this is fine dog surrounded by fire, like it's not great. And yet these two stories don't line up.
Yeah, there's a great scene in the UK office, in the TV show The Office, where he's explaining to the employees that, yeah, half of them are getting laid off, but the good news is that he's getting a promotion. And the employees are sort of like, there is no good news. There is no good news. Just tell us there's bad news, right?
Right.
And that's kind of how the economy feels, right? Like we keep hearing about we're the richest country in the world and the economy is going great. For who?
Right.
For who? Because I think the masses are not necessarily feeling that change, right?
Exactly. Well, and I think we all get to learn a fun new phrase, which is stagflation light. So according to UCLA, it is marking a period in which both inflation and unemployment remain modestly elevated. And it is this weird thing where prices are going up, the unemployment rate is slightly ticking up, but consumer demand and consumer, confidence in everything is going down, and the economy is kind of going along. And we'll talk about how it's maybe not actually going along all that well, but it is just this, I don't know, this is a weird, not cool period of everything feels off. And I think, that's been defined as this thing called the K-shaped economy. And basically, I think the first time I saw this was right during and after COVID. And there's different types of economic recoveries. The V-shaped economic recovery is it hits a low and then immediately everything bounces back up. I think they call U-shaped economies where it stays low for a while, which I feel like is probably the 2008 crisis. And then, eventually it starts to tick up. And I think the problem is you have this scenario, which is this K shape where things are recovering for some people, but not for everybody. And so rather than a shared V or a shared U shape, it's diverging. And you have this upper arm of the top 20% are sort of seeing all of the benefits. If you're a large corporation, if you're an asset-based wealth, so your stock market, you're a homeowner, things like that, where your success is tied to the stock market right now is going up. And so you have this perception, at least, of heading in the right direction. And yet, if you're in that bottom arm, you are small businesses, you are the low and middle income families, you're renting and you're living paycheck to paycheck, and you don't feel that, right? Like you are basically feeling like you are tied to whatever your employer wants to do. That's what you're doing. And you're sort of stuck in this current situation. And I think this metaphor makes sense to me because this is exactly how it feels. Why is the news good for the top half? Not even the top half, the top 10 to 20%, and everyone else doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, and I can even tell in my own sort of spending patterns, there's the necessities, like there's shopping and staying alive, and there's not a lot of other purchases outside of that right now because I'm almost saving and trying to have like assets that are liquid just so I can prepare for this event that I'm thinking is coming. It's not really like an event, right? It's more like a curation of options and jobs and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are others out there who are feeling the same way, where it's like, I'm going to have to be cash rich for a little while,
right?
Which is kind of scary, right?
Right. The gap between the haves and the have-nots has been getting worse, and it's not a new thing. This is a trend that we'll get into. But I think the fact that we're recognizing it is this K-shape is a way to give us the language to talk about it. But there's a bunch of like things that go into the downstream effects of this K-shape. And so the first one I want to go through is the wealth gap, which is this concept of, yes, for a long time, income has mattered less than asset ownership. And I think we'll talk about in a little bit, the ways that the economy has shifted for some people in a way that it hasn't for others. And so you talk about things like income taxes matter less. If you're a billionaire, your income tax already, you have a bunch of tricks that don't matter. But even, wealthy homeowners, a lot of your wealth is considered to be not based on the paycheck you're getting, and your top marginal tax rate is not where you're deriving your wealth from. And so a bunch of these things are starting to influence the way that people perceive the economy and perceive themselves. And so when you have this gap between the rich and the poor and the way that people who are tied to the stock market, tied to the value of their assets versus the lower income households who are impacted by inflation and, the current changes in the labor market and all of those kinds of things, it starts to show up in different ways. And you start to see this K-shape in a bunch of places. So again, if you're not watching us on YouTube, we'll talk through these charts, but there's a ton of charts of the New York Times. I mean, the New York Times is basically the chief paper of carrying water for billionaires, and even they are publishing articles about the wealth gap and the difference between these different strata of economic performance. So consumer spending, if you look at this chart of the consumer spending on higher and lower has started to diverge, and where it was kind of pacing together, everyone was impacted by tariffs, everyone was impacted by COVID, but in the last year, basically things have started to split out, and the lower and middle income folks are just not spending the same way. Their confidence is not growing the same way, and the higher income people continue to spend and continue to, deliver for the economy in ways that's kind of hiding people. And I will say, yes, there is consumer sentiment does tend to diverge based on party And so Trump coming into office suddenly means everyone who was a Republican suddenly miraculously overnight started to feel better. And genuinely, it's funny that you look at this graph and like Biden gets into office and the blue and red lines flip, and then Trump gets into office and the blue and red lines flip. So I don't want to minimize that like some of these economic signals are also just political tribalization that we have. But when you do start to look at some of these things, there is still a marked signal. So like you look at this graph of consumer sentiment by party, we are now to the point where Republican sentiment is higher than Democratic sentiment, but Republican sentiment today under Trump is lower than Democratic sentiment under Biden, right? So like it's this weird thing where sure, sentiment is flipping around and your perception of the economy does seem to be tied into your political views, but also we are a whole tier lower than where we were under, I don't know, like there's this weird thing where like, yes, this is a factor, but it's still, something's going on. It's worse now.
I think my impression as a conservative but a centrist, so I'm a little bit more biased to the center, right? But I almost feel like the eggs and gasoline thing is becoming hollow. People realize how hollow that is because, cool, even if eggs did change price, eggs do not indicate all the things you buy at the supermarket, right? And so
Right.
I feel like that's hollow and sort of, I shouldn't say the educated, but the people who know, who keep their eye on the things they're spending, they realize like, okay, eggs and gas, great. One tiny problem in my week is solved, but everything else is not kind of moving in the same way. So I think it's like, yeah, I think a lot of the sort of centrists, right, even on the conservative side, is sort of seeing it now. Where it's like, yeah, it's kind of cool and gimmicky that you talk about eggs and gas, but it's hollow, right?
Right. Yep. Well, and the things that aren't hollow, so wage growth, you can start to see that where post-COVID, a bunch of people who were claimed to be essential and had fairly powerful negotiating capabilities saw a ton of wage growth because you were the only person who was willing to show up and cook at the restaurant surrounded by other people. You got to demand more money versus the white collar worker who had a little bit less leverage being able to work from home. And that's fully reversed and started to diverge again into this K-shape of now the wages are at least stagnating, if not going down on the lower end of the economic spectrum, while higher earners have sort of gotten themselves back into the driver's seat of all of this. Part of that also is wage growth versus inflation. So where inflation has been sort of out of control, and they've, thank you, Biden, actually, for getting inflation under control, inflation never goes negative, right? Like the price of eggs went up and we stopped the price of eggs from going even higher, but we didn't reduce the price of eggs. I think at some point there's probably an entire episode on price gouging because a ton of things that happened when inflation started to tick up after COVID were not real. They were just companies being like, well, people expect the prices to go up so I can start to charge a higher, better margin. No, man, we should have freaking locked down capitalism during that, but okay.
Yeah, my neighbor was one of those guys at Amazon, buying things that he knew people would need, and
Great.
I mean, literally, there were people who did that, right? And
Sure.
and I shared a lot of conversations with him where I'd be like, "Oh, this is a great deal. I'm bringing in all these, and I'm selling them," and I'm like, "Yeah, dude, you're just price gouging, right?" Like,
Right. Exactly. Yikes.
Yeah.
Well, and I think so. If you look at this chart, inflation's gotten better, but not better than the wages of the middle and lower income people. So where if you're a white collar worker and you're at the top of the economic spectrum, you are now getting wage growth that's outpacing inflation, but the bottom folks have never once outpaced inflation compared to for the past 5 years. So things are getting more expensive and you're not getting paid more. And so again, this K-shape of if you're at the top of the economic funnel, things are going pretty well for you right now, not so much for the bottom of the funnel. I thought there was an interesting trend here from a Bank of America report around the buy now, pay later, and basically how much debt financing people are doing. And it was on pace and it's growing for everybody, but you can see in the chart the middle and lower income people are taking out credit and loans at a far higher clip than the rich are. And I think that's actually kind of interesting because usually the rich are the ones financing things through loans. Elon is not worth $850 billion. He's probably got like, I don't know, a couple tens of millions of dollars of liquid assets. He is $850 billion of stock value, and his entire financing of everything is through loans. It's collateralized loans against the stock. And the lower income folks are trying to repeat that pattern. It's not great. It's not great to have a giant credit-based economy.
Yeah, and again, I think of the movie The Big Short, where not The Big Short, sorry, We Crash, which is based on WeWork and the TV show, and you sort of see that scene where he goes to the investment bank, and they're like, "You are what is known as a high net worth individual, right?" And so it's like, you're going to need $100 million, right? We're going to need to give you $100 million to borrow against your reputation and the evaluation of your company. And I don't think people realize that is that people like Elon Musk, and when we talk about taxing the rich, right? Like the way they escape it is by having assets that are not even realized yet, right? So yeah,
exactly.
Getting a credit card to do that, not a good strategy, right?
No, not at all. Well, which leads us into the next one, which is the impact of tariffs and the impact of Trump's one big beautiful bill, the stupidest fucking name ever. You look at this chart. Again, sorry to the podcast listeners. I promise the YouTube video is interesting. You look at this chart of how tariffs are dragging numbers below the zero line. So your negative impact from tariffs, everybody gets hit by tariffs, and the rich get hit by the tariffs the most, but the one big beautiful bill, how much money you're getting back, goes above the line. And the lowest two deciles, Trump cost you more money. You didn't get a tax decrease. You got a tax hike under Trump's bill. So screw the bottom of the economic rungs. You need to somehow pay more, which is insane. Sure, as you start to go up into the upper deciles, you start to get a little bit of a tax benefit, but everybody up until the top 10%. Everyone in the bottom 90% have their Trump tax cuts wiped out by Trump tariffs. And only the rich have such a massive spike on this chart that they can overcome the negative impact of the tariffs and still see a benefit. And someday, American voters will notice that Republican tax cuts always do this. They never go to the bottom 90%. They always go to the top 10%. And then on top of it, the tariffs are a tax on you, the consumer. And it's just insane, this skew punishing all of us.
Do you think enough of them will notice it? Are they even still listening at this point? Because we've said negative things about somebody who they have had a hard time historically sort of investigating and researching.
Yeah, it's insane that no one pays attention and understands this. And then you're going to blame an immigrant who actually, I should have found the new stats that they just released. In the last 50 years, immigrants have added $15 trillion to the economy or some insane number. But no, it's not the trans kid trying to play sports. It's not the immigrant who's screwing you and you haven't seen economic growth for the last 40 years. It's the billionaires. It's this K-shaped economy making it very clear to you what's going on. And so the bottom rung of this Bank of America report on people who are living paycheck to paycheck, and that's only going up. And the number of people saying that they are struggling and that they aren't putting in savings, that they aren't doing anything, only continues to tick up as the K-shape makes itself even clearer. One of the crazier maps we're going to show is food insecurity. So the idea that you do not have enough calories every day to sustain yourself is one of the definitions of, when a household cannot access enough food due to money and other, essential resources that are not available to them. And you look at this map of food insecurity in 2021, right as the height of COVID, and there's food insecurity everywhere. There's about 34 million people in the country who are experiencing it, which alone is already an insane number. It's 10.4% of the population feels this way. And then you look at 2023, just 2 years later, the entire map shifts a darker color and it goes up to 47 million. Only 14% of the country but it's broadly shared pain. This is not like suddenly the Rust Belt is suffering more because their manufacturing is going away. This map changes pretty much everywhere, except for like, curious what Minnesota's doing right. But thank you, Tim Walz, maybe. But it's crazy.
Endless supply of fish. Right?
Exactly. Land of
And they come
10,000 lakes. They're just always eating fish.
They come out frozen, so they're ready to store. It's scary though, right? Because 10%. Like those are the numbers that are important to me. You say 34 million, I immediately go, holy crap! 10 people in the room, one of them was hungry. Now take it even further. 10 kids in the room,
Correct.
one of them's hungry. Like now it's even higher, and it's that just in a first world country, right? Richest country in the world.
Allegedly, and yet
Allegedly.
these stats were bad under Biden and getting worse under Trump. It is crazy. So again, just that K-shape. If you are in the top percentage of the country, you don't have a problem feeding yourself, and this is only getting worse. Everything is diverging, and
I think we need MEGA, Make America Even Greater Again.
Great. That again,
Yes,
I question whether it ever was. I'd like to, just Meg. Just
or
Meg.
even
Make America
Magaga.
great.
Make America great.
Great enough. Mage. Make America great enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
So
would be a
interesting
magic
facts.
trick.
Yeah.
So inequality, which is this measure of this thing called the Gini coefficient, where this measure of what would it look like if a 100% on the score of the Gini coefficient is a single person owns all of the wealth. And a 0 on the Gini coefficient would be every single person owns an exact same amount of wealthy. And we are now just constantly rising. We've been rising for the past 40 years, but we had that little dip in COVID. We'll talk about that little dip in COVID, but it's just constantly rising, and the inequality continues to just tick up. And so you can see that inequality in things like the billionaires got 22% richer just in 2025. That is an insane thing to say. These are the percentage changes just last year, and that's before Trump's tax cuts showed up in this April's tax filing, right? So it is a crazy level of the top of the K, not just, did your bottom 80% of the country, did their wages grow by 22%? No. And when you're a billionaire, 22% is an insane number to get higher. Homeowner wealth. You look at the homeowner compared to renter individual wealth. Homeowners in the last 3 years, or no, I guess this is the last 6 years. Homeowners in the last 6 years are 43 times more wealthy than they were in 2019. If you're a renter, you are like 3% more wealthy. Like the growth for you on this chart is insane. So again, we go back to that K-shape, that concept of if your wealth is tied to an asset like a house, if your wealth is tied to the success of the stock market like a billionaire, all you see is gains, and that is not reflected for the rest of us.
I just don't know how everybody can be okay with the billionaires are getting richer and we're not. Like, I just see, even as taking it that, because obviously,
right,
like as a conservative, like I should be mental and on the bandwagon, but I'm just not. It doesn't make any sense to me that anybody could be happy with the billionaires who are escaping paying higher taxes.
Right. Well, and it's one of those things
richer.
of there's a version of conservative thought that I still wouldn't have loved, but like $100 million is an insane amount of money. You can shit in a gold toilet if you want. Like, you want to have ridiculous government shouldn't interfere with my money, but I can probably find, I'll see if I can link this in the YouTube edit of the video the guy does of putting a grain of sand, and the grain of sand is like $100,000 or something insane that even the bottom 80% of us don't have $100,000 in wealth sitting around. And then they do a grain of sand for every $100,000. And by the time you get to like Taylor Swift, and Taylor Swift has like $2 billion and the mound of sand that you're looking at, and then you get to Elon and his $850 billion, like the numbers are so astronomical. And I'm not asking for, like, we don't need to prevent anybody from getting wealthy. We were at a startup, and I'm sorry, I put more effort in than the rest of you. I deserved the paycheck I got at the end of that relative to what you guys did. But at a certain point, that relative percentage does stop making sense. And yeah, it is crazy. And the bad news for us is it's showing up in a chart like this, which is you look at numbers like, oh, GDP growth and spending is heading in good directions, but it's not really, because it's the top 20% of the economy making up 50% of our spending. And so this is a quote from the New York Times. Holiday spending this year is expected to surpass $1 trillion for the first time, according to the National Retail Federation. But it's the very wealthy making expensive purchases who will be driving much of that spending, while many lower income Americans will buy discounted versions of items or finance them with credit cards. And so anytime you hear about the economy doing well, are you hearing about the economy doing well, or are you hearing about the top 20% spending half of the money that we're seeing in all of this? And it's crazy. And so it's this thing called the wealth effect. And basically, the wealth effect is this thing coined by Macro Micro, this economic site that started to collate a bunch of the numbers that we pulled from here, which is basically saying the economy is growing because the wealthy feel wealthier. And that's because the stock market continues to rise and interest rates are where they are. And so they spend more money. And it is a mirage. It is a vibe-based economy. They feel better, but because none of their wealth is real, it's all conceptual. It is the promise that they could sell the stock. It is the promise that they could sell their house. They therefore convert that in small little bits into ways that they're going to spend now. And we all think that the economy is doing great because of this wealth effect. But it is paper wealth. Like, you look at this and you can see that it is just a mirage. The growth since 2000 of everybody's wealth is in pieces that are real, and then this final column of where's the majority of the growth coming from on this chart, it's paper wealth. It's the concept of I could turn this into money later.
Yeah, I almost feel it too. I wonder, do the lower income conservatives, do they feel like the consumer slice above them, white collar, do they feel like, well, they're benefiting, and so that's good? I find that hard to believe that they have this sort of self-sacrificial stance about it. But who do they think is getting richer if they're not, right? Like,
right. Well, and I wonder that some of that is two things. The American dream has been turned into, I could be the billionaire, and so when I someday will be rich, I don't want to have to pay more taxes. I want all of that wealth. And so now, why would I do that to the people I want to become? And so they don't vote in their own interest. They vote in what they think the future will be, which is kind of the paper wealth concept too. You're a homeowner. You feel rich because you think you will sell this house someday for $2 million. You'd better hope the housing bubble never does that and never changes. And I wonder if it's a similar mentality. It's all about where I could be in the future, not where I am today. I also think politicization is part of this as well, right? It's my team feels the benefit, even though I don't directly. And so I'm willing to let my team feel that way. I genuinely can't understand the mentality.
weird net to be trapped in too, because it's, unless you're taking steps to actually progress yourself through a job market, so going back to school and doing a certification in tech or whatever, unless you're actually spending that and investing in yourself, then those white collar jobs are not getting any easier to do. And now we're faced with this situation where AI is taking away those entry level jobs anyway.
Right.
So it's even further away for somebody who's on the low income side to get it, to make that. My father made the leap, right? My father worked in a warehouse and he boxed product in a big catalog company, and he used to pass the computer room occasionally. And one day he asked the question, what do I need to learn to do that job?
Sure.
And he did it. But
Right.
those opportunities, and I was sort of like maybe one of the part of our generation, one of the last to be able to do that, drop out of school at 16, have the smarts enough to know, I know computers because I gamed on them, go take a certification and get in. And my kids look at me and they're like, why can't I do it your way? And I was like, no, you
Right.
can't do that now. There is no going outside for a cigarette with a recruiter and just looking out, right? Like,
Right.
the
Yep.
gap is getting wider. So
Yep. Well, and I think all of this leads to the economy feels bad, right? Like the majority of us are not in the top 20%. The majority of us are seeing the other side of this. And so I think pessimism is generally rising, right? Like you have sentiments even just between last year and this year is nosediving. The number of people who think that they are going to have better employment opportunities in 2026 is down almost 20%. The people who expect their own economic prosperity to get better is down 14%. Like people are not feeling good about the direction we're headed in.
is that right? Expect unemployment to increase this year.
Expect employment to increase this year.
I read it wrong.
So
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So yes,
Expect
so they're
employment
genuinely
to
thinking like this is the year the economy is going to pick up and we'll all get hired again. Is headed in the wrong direction. No one thinks we're going in the right direction.
Yeah. Again, it'd be interesting to see, like, and you can't always break these down by demographics, but of that 36%, I'm sure a lot of it's, like of the 64%, like what party, what demographic.
Right. Yep. That is a key factor to all of this.
Yeah.
And so there's a quote out of a Fortune article that I'll link in the show notes, which is the top economist says latest jobs data shows a jobless expansion with no historical precedent, and it's gut-wrenching for the middle class. I think it's because you start to look at a bunch of these numbers, hiring has stalled, and we'll talk about the fact that layoffs are part of the story as well, but even if you just look at hiring, in 2025, employers added 584,000 jobs. They added 2 million new jobs in 2024. So you look at this chart and you see the direction for job growth is not positive. It is only trending downwards. And maybe they're trying to think maybe it's stabilized. Maybe in 2026, it'll just sort of be stagnant. But that's not good for the people who are currently unemployed, the long-term unemployment rate. A bunch of things are not headed in the right direction for the people who don't have household income, who don't have stock-based income. If you need a job, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, the trends here aren't great.
Yeah, and we talked about this, right, in the episode about the Industrial Revolution, right? And I'm sure it's a little bit different because we have the internet and news, so the news spreads faster, so consumer sentiment changes much more rapidly. But that was a time that quickly became evident that there was an explosion of jobs, right? And even people like us who were probably in a position of innovation to see, like, here's where I think the economy could go. Even we're having a hard time identifying it, right? Where it's like,
right,
where's the opportunity? And these are all the technical and revenue challenges that you have in this direction. I can't speak to living during the Industrial Revolution, but I don't see this explosion, right? I'm not even seeing the powder keg where all these jobs and innovation is suddenly coming from.
Right.
It scares me. I've been scared for at least a year and a half now, not being able to see the future for the first time.
Yep. Well, and if you go back and listen to that episode, there's plenty of cases of the person who was the blacksmith had 5 years of pain, but pretty quickly they needed people in the factories who knew how to deal with steel and producing and a bunch of those kinds of things. You lost your job as a hand weaver, but within 5 or 10 years, there were 400 new opportunities to work in local shops that sprung up across where all of the railroads were going. It was not great, but you could see how that was headed. And yes, we're early in this, and maybe we don't know that yet, but the trend is not headed in the right direction here.
Yeah, and I can make a loose sort of equivalency where it's like enterprise architects, I'm seeing an explosion in their jobs. But what people need to understand that's different about the blacksmith and the enterprise architect now is they're calling in the architect because they want to get to artificial intelligence quicker, and they need people with architecture experience and big data experience to help them modernize their stacks to get closer. So we're actually teaching them how to eliminate more jobs even quicker. This is not like, hey, get us to AI so we can explode. This is show us how to do it so we can do what all those guys are doing and remove the overhead and operational cost of all these people. Right?
Exactly. Well, and sort of to that point, layoffs are happening. I think you can't have gone through 2025, especially working in white collar and tech, without seeing the massive layoffs. Amazon, 32,000, I think, between this January and last October. Like, it's crazy numbers of what they're letting go of people.
I think I heard yesterday too, weren't there some overseas as well? Like, I thought I had heard like another 30,000 maybe in India or somewhere over
I mean, it
over the
wouldn't
last day.
surprise me,
But
right?
to your point, it's every day now, right? Like every other day we're watching a big company
Yep.
announce new numbers.
Well, and if you could zoom in on this chart, which actually I should probably figure out if I can do a zoom during the YouTube edit, some of these jobs, the massive red bars where they are laying people off, there are sectors, and we'll talk about, there are places where as you shift to AI, as things happen, nurses are becoming more important because you have so many people in the healthcare system who still need a human being to work with them. There are jobs that are seeing increases. And so actually it's interesting, layoffs are happening. But you look at this chart of overall employment, there's a massive spike of unemployment as COVID hits and everyone who's working in a service job gets fired. But you look at this chart, overall unemployment is relatively stable. And it is this weird thing where there are people who maybe were getting laid off who are now finding employment again, and people who are getting laid off now because they're in white collar work. So it's this weird thing where depending on your role, you also might think the economy is doing okay because you're not facing the layoffs. And so it's this weird, confusing message of, are we going through a massive shift? Is AI really firing a bunch of people? Because these unemployment numbers don't tell that story yet. It's genuinely confusing to try to figure out what the economy is doing.
Yeah, and there's also numbers that are going to be hard to quantify, right? For example, I'm a dual worker, right? I can look at myself and say, in the worst case scenario, I could go become a soccer coach and I won't starve to death. I'm not going to live the life I live today, nor any of my dependents. But how many people are leaving positions and then seeking employment, making perhaps less money, but it's something that it does feel a little bit safer from the technical layoffs.
Right. Well, and I think we saw that in the Industrial Revolution episode, which was you go look at the research and the numbers they were doing in like the 1920s through the 1930s. And because so many people were getting hired in factories, they were trying to quantify the farm layoffs and a bunch of the places where people were losing jobs. And it was this weird shift where they couldn't quite figure out and actually document. We were losing people, but also we were hiring people, and it was a net negative, but it wasn't as big a negative as if you had just looked at industry by industry and sector by sector, because sure, entire sectors were disappearing, but enough of them were being replaced and plugged in. And numbers like this make me think maybe some of that is happening, but because we can't actually track at the individual, Andrew is no longer in tech, but he is in a service, teaching job. The overall number won't look bad in the economy, but we should pay attention to what's happening to the tech sector. We should pay attention to what's happening to retail services as in-person economic activity is being replaced by online economic activity. There's a bunch of these things that are sort of obscured, and also long-term unemployment is purposefully dropped out of these numbers. And as soon as you stop looking for a job, they don't count you in the unemployment numbers. And I think that number is now up to 8 to 10%. So it's hard to sift through the economic noise, but certainly white-collar workers don't feel great right now, I would imagine. And there's plenty of people who are, it's just the vibes are off, man.
Yeah, they definitely are. Yeah, my like I say, I'm having a hard time predicting the future and seeing that innovation and that explosion. And also, we haven't talked about it too much outside of the tech conversations, but that's just genuinely big technical problems to solve, right? And
right. We don't have the railroad yet. They fired a bunch of people without actually having the steam engine. They have ideas and plans for a steam engine. And it's like, okay, well, hold on. This just, yeah.
It is like someone showing up with a car in ancient Rome, right? It's like, we just built all these cobbled roads. And it's like, oh, well, we got this automobile. It's like you can drive it for 20 miles before you hit the countryside, and it's no good anymore, right?
Right, and we haven't figured out petroleum refining yet. So this car has a single tank of gas, and now what's it going to do? Right. No. Well, and I think people are seeing that in ways, the way that we measure parts of the economy is also including people quitting. And so there's actual economic charts from the Fed that show the rate of people leaving their jobs and finding new jobs. And it's not just, you're not quitting because you just are tired of tech and you're retiring. This is people quitting to go find another job. And so there's this Fortune article talking about in a healthy economy, people quit for better paying roles, driving wage growth for everyone. Today, however, workers are clinging on to the jobs they have out of sheer fear, which is according to Diane Swank, a chief economist at KPMG. This lack of movement has created a kind of mobility trap where the natural path to a middle class raise has essentially vanished. And so you can see in this chart from the Fed that this goes back to 2008 and the economic crisis. As the 2008 crisis hit, the rate of people quitting plummeted, and then slowly people gained more confidence. And then COVID hit. That caused people to fear and cling on to their jobs. But very quickly after COVID, we got to pretty high levels of workers felt confident enough in their own value that they went and got better paying jobs. And I think that's one of the things we'll talk about the impact of COVID. A bunch of people felt empowered. And I think a huge chunk of this current story is COVID terrified the owner class. The billionaires and the people in charge of hiring us realized we had the power and we were quitting at unprecedented rates. You look at this chart, we were quitting at unseen rates to go get better jobs, and they needed to kill that. And the way that they killed that was return to office mandates and AI. And you can see that we've immediately started to plummet back down. Now, we're not quite as bad as the 2008 crisis, but it's not headed in the right direction as people are scared of what's going on in this economy and aren't willing to quit. But basically, it's frozen the job market. There is no ability to feel like you can move anywhere. And that's not good. I also think part of this is AI and part of it's too soon to know if it's AI, but entry-level jobs seem to be drying up. And we're not quite to where 2008 got us, but the opportunity for someone to come into a new role feels like, and again, some of this is weird because it's vibe-based, but it feels like entry-level jobs are disappearing. And we've talked about this in past episodes of if everybody can vibe code their way to mid-level engineering capabilities, then there's no point in hiring junior engineers. But if you don't hire junior engineers, then you're never going to get the opportunity to turn into mid and senior engineers. And there's definitely signals in the economic data that this is a thing that's starting to happen. And that's pretty concerning because if you can't get a new job straight out of college, how do you ever build up the expertise to build your career? How do you enter the workplace?
Yeah, and I think for a lot of those kids, the challenge is going to be too is we started seeing that next generation of engineers. So our expectation of the entry-level engineer is increasing, but partly because we're not looking for entry-level guys, right? I want a guy who's just a brainiac and ticks all the boxes of ambition and is going to get the job done no matter how hard it is to get done.
Right.
Because I don't want the expensive experienced person, but I know I need more than the entry-level guy who's going to spend the first year and a half learning on the job. So there's an attitude shift even on the hiring side, right? Because it's like companies are getting lean and saying, well, we only have limited number of positions. So instead of the 20 that I would have asked for, now I need 5 very specific experienced people instead, right? So you almost sense that in the business world now that, yeah, there's almost like a hold mentality on the entry-level jobs. Worrying times for.
And we'll get into some of the history of how we got here. And that is a perfect example of when all you think about is how do I juice my investor return for the next quarter? You don't care that those hiring practices are screwing you 2, 5, 10 years from now because you're not interested in what the business looks like in 10 years. In 10 years, you'll have probably exited, killed the entire industry, and moved on to the next one that you're going to rip through. And so it fully ruins all of capitalism's incentives. And I'm not sure the capitalists want all of our incentives to be on this shaky of a foundation because it's the only thing propping them up. And I think you can see this white collar bloodbath is starting to show up in all of the different headlines. And as AI is starting to show some cases that are legitimate and some cases that are way too soon to actually be worth it, a bunch of companies are starting to say, okay, yeah, I don't need these white collar jobs. And it is interestingly sort of an inverse of past economic flips of it used to be the steel workers who were getting put out of work and you were told to go become a software engineer or learn office job skills. And now the AI is putting the office job skill out of work. And ironically, that's creating a bit of a blue collar job renaissance. And so a bunch of the people who are doing things that you can't replace with AI is actually showing up as a place of growth in the economy and being able to do something with your hands that the robots can't yet, although Elon certainly wants the robots to also replace all of those people. We fortunately are not there yet, but yeah, it's this fascinating sort of flip of where do you get work in the future is sort of this open question right now, and that's causing all of these freezes in the economy. It's uncertainty is bad, actually.
Yeah, and I'm actually, again, I'm one of those people who has a dual career right now, right? Just because not just fear of the white collar jobs going away, but it's really laying a foundation for the uncertainty I feel about the next few years, where it's like, okay, if I go get another certification in this, I'll make enough to survive, right? Like,
right.
I got a place in the new world. However, you got to be careful not to get too confident, because all of my customers are the same consumer vendors who I'm relying on having jobs to pay me in a job where I don't use my hands, but I use my feet, right?
Yep.
So there is a sense of like, this is the best I can really do.
Right.
To prep for this.
Yep. Well, and so that leads into the final part of this, which is this is not just an individual thing. There is also a have and have not in the economic structure of businesses. So if you are a small business, you are struggling, and your perception of what the future holds for you is pretty bad, actually. So on this chart that we're looking at, in terms of revenue growth, employment growth, and plans for making investments in your business, capital investment, what is the small business survey just this in January of 2026? What is your outlook for 2026? And the orange and red boxes are over 50 and sometimes 60% of their sentiment are negative. They don't think that they're going to see a ton of revenue growth. They don't think they're going to hire a ton, and they're not sure that they're going to find ways to invest in their businesses. And this is not true for large corporations. Large corporations will get into the Magnificent Seven and a bunch of huge companies that are surfing on their stock valuations and do not feel this way. And yet small businesses make up the majority of the economy. And so again, it's this K-shape reinforcing that depending on where you are, how big you are, you feel entirely different about this economy. And it's not good that we are sort of balkanizing the economy into your entire perception of where you're headed depends on how wealthy you are. It's not good. So how did we get here? I want to talk about some of the earlier things that happened and how this is not totally new, but it is being hyper-focused by this historical precedent that we got to. So the first one, yes, Reaganomics. Genuinely, 40, 50 years ago, you can shake your head all you want.
Sounded great, though, didn't it? Trickle-down economics. It sounded good.
Right.
It's just there's a net. There's a net catching it all.
Yeah. Right under the yacht is a giant dam stopping all the other yachts from rising when the economic tides raise. Yeah. But I genuinely think it is this one of these things where the focus under Reagan started technically with, I'm blanking on the guy's name.
Carter?
No, poor Carter and the original stagflation, not Thomas Friedman. Who am I thinking of? Anyways, the economic theory started to change in the 70s. Nixon went off the gold standard, basically made monopoly money at that point, and then Reagan's policies really reinforced that, where capitalism now starts to shift to stock price and investor return, where you used to be able to negotiate and the company were dragged there by unions, but you had a responsibility to your employers. You had pensions. You had actual responsibilities in partnership with your employees and the economy. And the 80s start to see a change in that relationship between actually stock price is the most important thing that we're going to do. Trickle-down economics, the top deserve it, and they'll share a little bit of that with you. And globalization started to tick up as we started to farm out a bunch of this work overseas. And so I think you look at charts like this one, where again, come see us on YouTube, you basically put Reagan on the line where this original K-shape starts to break out as the economic gains start to stagnate for the middle and lower income, and the 95th percentile sees all of the benefits. And you, as a lower income or even middle income white collar worker, were seeing productivity gains. You were seeing that everything was working better, but your wages weren't keeping pace. So you made everything 40 times more efficient. You didn't see 40-time gain in your salary the same way that people who transferred all of their wealth into stocks and assets did. And so this K-shape really you start to see actually back in even the Reagan period. And it is Reagan who is the dividing line in pretty much any chart of why did things start to get crappier for us? If you go and put when Reagan got put into office, you can probably see that that's when the split happened. It's not the only thing, though. So the subprime crisis of 2008 also really starts to reinforce this, right? So when you look at what were the solutions to the 2008 crisis, quantitative easing, the idea that they basically wrote money into the economy, which favored the asset holders. The labor recovery of the 2008 crisis, if you take a look at this, is crazy longer than any other past recession recovery. It's because all of the bailouts of 2008, the original Tea Party was actually just racist against Obama, but what the media told you the actual goal of the Tea Party was is actually not that wrong. The bailout didn't favor the people. The bailout favored the asset holders and the top of the economic chart and didn't really help the rest of us. That economic recovery chart is insane, how long it took us to recover from the impact of 2008. And that has a lot to do with everything. If we're talking about a K-shape in which at the top of the K, your asset-based, stock-based portfolio is what keeps you propped up, then 2008 is a key driver of the bailout wasn't for your 401k that got killed. It was for that top 20% who were tied to too big to fail and all of that nonsense.
Again, it's like a whole large percent of the population have been double whammied, but the second whammy is their own. In the first pass, situation had them born into poverty and opportunity, and then they have an opportunity to sort of say, we don't like the way our country is heading. But then the second whammy is they're choosing not to educate themselves on the economy and how it's so detrimental to specifically them.
Right.
And they're just happy to go on. And then you got people like me who are sort of saying, Kevin, if they're going to walk off the edge of a cliff, however you correctly point out, we're strapped to them, right?
Right.
But yeah, it is scary times. It's like, how do we encourage people to educate themselves and make a decision based on what they learned versus they're wearing red and they like Trump. This has to be my candidate. It's like, this candidate has nothing for you.
Well, and there are plenty of problems with the monoculture of the 60s and 70s and the, a bunch of people who did not benefit from the middle class growth. You had to be white to benefit from that, right? For the most part. So there are a bunch of things that I would not want to go back to. One of the things, maybe this should be an entire episode, is media consolidation. You get your local news through Clear Channel and Sinclair, and neither of them are interested in you educating yourself about the policies that are keeping you where you're at economically. Media consolidation has made all of us dumber because our access to... If CBS News broke the story of the monks burning themselves alive in Vietnam, 60 million people watched that and understood what was going on in Vietnam and shifted public opinion away from the war. Like those things were possible in a way that they are definitely not now. And the people in charge of how you consume information are uninterested in you learning about that. Tech consolidation, media consolidation, they're all the same story of billionaire consolidation. And there's probably an entire episode just about that. All right, so the final history point that I want to talk through is COVID, right? So COVID actually, interestingly, sort of reverses a bunch of these trends. You look at a bunch of trends in 2020 through 2021, a bunch of lines go in the other direction because we had stimulus. We had a bunch of people reacting to the fact that this was a massive economic shock. And at the same time, the problem is, it also drove up inflation. And there's a genuine reason for inflation to go up during COVID, which is if people can't go onto the factory floor and produce the microchip that powers the thing, can't go and can the food, can't go and do a thing, then the existing supplies become far more valuable. And so, yes, inflation genuinely is an understandable side effect of what was going on with the economy at that point. But there was price gouging as a result of it as well. And the K-shape really quickly starts to return itself, which has the ability to let remote workers survive. So if you're at the top of the economic system and you can just work from home, you don't have as much of an impact to your economic well-being as the people who still have to physically go places. And so I think you have this weird confluence of positives and negatives sort of starting to drive this K-shape, as depending on how you experienced COVID, you also had a different relationship with the economy at that time. And so I think all of this basically gets to the last 40 years have reinforced this K-shape, has just set us up for all of this to happen to us. And it's the asset holders and the rest of us. And that's how we got here.
Yeah, and they it's interesting in a way too, like the last 20 years, the stock market being open to the day trader. So like, welcome to the casino. And then, there's obviously a large percent of the population who didn't and still haven't educated themselves on the stock market. And a lot of their buying and purchases is just sort of guessing and following trends. And, you have some of the population who did try to educate themselves, but ultimately, it feels a little bit like a mirage, right? Like, come in and invest just like the investors get to do. Oh, but by the way, all those same banks and investors who are getting the bailout for the 2008 sort of diabolical situation they created, you're not going to recover from it because the bailout isn't for you. It really is wild how poorly represented Americans are in a country that was founded on taxation without representation is bad.
Right. Well, and to your question of why don't they vote for their own interests, a bunch of people's retirement is now tied to the stock market. And so their perception is that, well, what's good for the rich who are in the stock market is good for my retirement in the stock market, except pay attention. Look at what happened in 2008. Your 401k got wiped out, but the billionaires' investments didn't get wiped out. They got the government bailout. And so it is this weird just... You have been set up for failure by all of these trends over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, and a lot of these people don't realize, like, it's what's the saying? Pay Peter by Robin Paul, or rob Peter to pay Paul. They're looking at the stock market hoping that they've got the right stock, and chances are a lot of the lower income investors didn't get to pick up Apple and Berkshire Hathaway, right? So they're sitting on top of sort of industry stock that is potentially susceptible to the challenges we're talking about, right? Where it's like, they are the chopping block, right? They are the companies that can disappear. So, but then they're getting hit on the consumer side by higher prices, not as fast on the wages rising, and also jobs disappearing. So it's like, just feels weird to be excited even about the stock market on one side while I'm getting robbed on the other, right?
Right, exactly. Especially because the stock market is about your retirement, which is hopefully 40, 30, 20 years away versus you can't pay for things now, right? Like it is this weird mental trade-off of, and it's, I do, there's probably an interesting thing to research into, which is, did Social Security actually end up making people over worried about their retirement and their old age and be willing to sacrifice how they experience the current economic situation? And so they're constantly looking to the end of life, and well, the stock market always grows and always gets me to the end. So I need to reinforce what's good for the stock market long term because that's where my retirement is. And it's like, I don't know, man. That's rough. It's just you said the word mirage, and it genuinely does sometimes feel like it's a magician who's waving their hand over here and talking about immigrants and trans people and doing all of this while they're literally picking your pocket with the other hand. Like it is just, it's bad.
Yeah, and I think it's even worse than the pickpocket because it's the pickpocket's laughing too, right? It's like you're so uneducated, you're missing. It's not even magic. You're just missing us ripping you off. Like you left your coats in the coat room, and that's where we rip you off. Like there's almost like it's so obvious. It's really sad that they're being taken advantage of.
It's the mirage that convinces you to drink the sand. Because you've been so tricked into it that you're actively harming yourself.
People, drinking sand is bad.
Right.
Injecting yourself with bleach, bad. Two bad things.
Doesn't matter what you hear from a TikTok influencer. Please stop drinking sand.
Yeah.
Well, and so speaking of mirages, I think the AI economy is what I want to talk about next. So the AI economy, and we're calling it that because just as we were talking about magic chicks and mirages, the entire economy at this point is AI in a way that doesn't feel good. And let's talk through that. So the first is what they coined as the Magnificent Seven: Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Meta, Tesla, and Alphabet, who owns Google, and basically drove the market and the S&P 500 gains since 2023. And this quote from Money: at $21.5 trillion, their collective market capitalizations now exceed the gross domestic product of every country on Earth besides the United States. Out of 7 companies. That is insane. And I think they are basically leading this general bull market where most industries are driving investor returns, but especially the ones tied to technology. And I don't know, man.
It's a good job we don't allow monopolies in this country.
Oh, gee, if only we had some kind of antitrust capacity.
Yep.
But I mean, like, a healthy economy doesn't put all of its eggs into so few baskets. Like, what are we doing here? This is an insane scenario to have so few driving so much of this.
You said so much, but also so many. There's just so many people who are employed by these 7 that you're at the whim of
or the companies on the whim of those companies, right? Like, how many companies are on AWS Cloud? And if AWS Cloud isn't successful, you're not successful. Crazy. Yeah. So according to Mark Zandi, a chief economist at Moody's Analytics, 22 states are actually in a recession already. But because we're living in 2 different economies, we don't see that, right? So the Harvard economist Jason Furman pointed out in this post on Twitter, while only 4% of GDP came from investment in AI data centers and software, that investment accounted for 92% of the GDP growth in 2025. So basically, 22 states already in recession, pretty much the economy would almost be in a recession. These are tiny little lines that are barely above. So if you look at the bar chart on the right, like 2025's growth without the tech industry is barely positive, barely anything. And yet you look at the graph on the left, when you include AI data centers and all of this investment that's happening, that growth looks astronomical, but it's not real, right? I think a couple of people have pointed out that, yes, some of that money would have gone elsewhere. You would have put that money into something, but it's not really clear that all of that money would have gone somewhere. And it is basically on this one giant bet, AI. It's either AI is going to succeed or it's not. And the valuations coming out of this is tiny. Why does this look so small? This looked bigger on my editing screen. I'll see if I can zoom it during the edit. The growth that they are sort of propping up through AI investment is also driving the valuations of these companies out of control. Normally, you might invest, ahead of the curve. You invest before revenue shows up. But there are 10 AI startups without a single penny of profit. 0 cents of profit coming out of these 10 AI startups. And cumulatively, they're valued at $1 trillion, which that's insane. Those are numbers that don't make sense. This is worse than the dot-com bubble. And in fact, they've quantified it. The AI bubble is 17 times larger than the dot-com bubble, 4 times as large as the 2008 financial bubble in the housing crisis. And the dot-com bubble was sector specific. We'll do an episode at some point on the different economic cycles we've seen, and .com felt bad to everybody in tech, but didn't have a wide economic impact because it just impacted basically Silicon Valley, versus 2008 and AI seems to be economy wide.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, like with the housing crisis, there was sort of a deterioration, right? Like the economy was bad. People started to default on the mortgages over time. But then when the event reached fever pitch, it felt quick, right? Anybody who wasn't understanding and watching the economy, it probably felt really quick. What feels weird right now is there are real decisions being made against the masses. And if there is a bubble, then the recovery it doesn't feel like as quick as a bailout, right? It feels like, cool, you took 25,000 different actions on the way to here.
Right.
Then the bubble happened. how are you going to roll that back, right? Are you rehiring people from the 250,000 people you let go? Like, what's the plan?
Well, and even the 2008 crisis wasn't preemptively firing all of the construction workers because the housing costs were all like, you know what I'm saying? Like they're currently anticipating that AI will show a positive benefit to businesses and firing people now. And it's like, well, but that positive benefit hasn't shown up. 95% of use cases fail. The stock market's getting a little concerned that there's no actual revenue profit here. So like, yeah, it feels worse. And okay, so 17 times larger bubble, and those misallocated funds are going into some pretty limited places. So you look at this chart of capital expenses from the AI hyperscalers, basically the people who need to host the AI infrastructure, and their capital expense is exploding. They are spending tons of their operating cash on construction of new data centers. And you look at this chart of operating cash flow and how for most of their last, the last 12 years, they've underspent their cash flow. And so that's good, right? You want to have cash reserves. You look at, there were stories for the past decade about Apple is sitting on, $100 billion of money and they aren't spending it because they want to be able to bet on the next big thing. The bet has come. They've decided to spend that money on AI, and now the spending cash flow is under the capital expense. So they are now taking out loans. They are now spending ahead of the curve. And what used to look like a giant cash glut on all of these companies' books, they're now having to go and get loans to spend on this data center spending. And these are crazy numbers. This is ridiculous, to the point that construction in the economy has stalled. No one is building more than they were in the past couple of years, except for in AI data centers. AI data centers are massively overspending, and that's having an impact. So all of this spending in AI data centers is having impacts on the rest of the construction industry. So they're drawing talent away from other projects and bringing all of the workers over onto these massive AI data center projects. Tariffs are crushing the profit margins because all of the materials are in a lot of cases externally sourced. And then all of the immigration crackdowns have drained about 10% of the construction workforce. And so now if you want to build a thing, you're basically competing with tariff costs. Immigration crackdowns have taken away 10% of your workers, and a bunch of those workers are now working on data centers, not on your projects. And younger workers aren't entering this field the same way that they were because younger workers don't seem interested in this as a career path. And so it's this crazy thing where data centers are being pitched to communities as this economic boom. We're going to come to your town and we're going to build this data center. And that's not actually real. There's no increase in employment. If anything, they're struggling to find people to do these jobs. It has all of the negative impacts of consuming your water, consuming your energy. Local residents pay more energy bills, even though they're not consuming more energy, to cover the cost of the data center in their community. It's polluting their community, and there's no job growth once the data center is there. You take a look at an example like Microsoft. Microsoft runs one of these massive data centers with 50 people. So the trade-off for the community to get this massive investment, it's not really an investment for them. So all of this money is going into where? Where's the money going other than to power the AI capabilities? So it's just, again, what are we doing? This is pouring a ton of money, pouring a ton of pieces of the economy into a thing that hasn't proven it shows up anywhere. And sure, maybe I'm wrong. 5 years from now, AI is doing a bunch of cool things, but people are getting nervous that it's not showing benefits in a bunch of places.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, and I wonder, and it's kind of a positive, it's a survival technique, again, talking to the things I can do that won't help me thrive, but help me survive, right? And so is some of that innovation coming from people doing their own businesses where they're starting to get AI, they're sort of getting like citizen data scientists, right? Where they're able to now take advantage of data, and it's new for them, but someone like me teaches them how to use AI. For example, a coach collecting data through GPS of their players and being able to provide a better service. Like, is some of it like these micro transactions for people like me who have a second career where they can use AI, and some people thrive in that, but it doesn't feel explosive, right? That feels like
Right.
the renaissance is not going to happen overnight where people are like, cool, I can use AI and I have a quilting business and suddenly I can reach more people and AI is going to do custom designs for me and I can make them like that.
Yep.
That's not an explosive growth, right?
No. And if you're an employee at one of these big 7 companies, certainly you felt a degree of security from the fact that you had $50 billion of cash on hand for them to invest in whatever they want to do. And within 2 years, they've fully inverted that. You are now cash poor, begging people to loan you money to build these data centers because you're spending all of your cash on hand. And that's got to feel risky for, okay, the bet on, the Apple self-driving car didn't pay off. That's why we had $20 billion allocated on hand to cover that mistake. None of you are fired. Work on the next thing. That is not going to be the case anymore. That has to be risky for everybody involved. Well, and so I also want to talk about these companies aren't just masking other economic weaknesses through all of this. The whole scheme itself feels a little bit like Enron, a little bit like we invested and paid other companies to do things to make it look like we're doing this. And Hank Green has an amazing meltdown that I'll play right now as he tries to figure out what this chart explains.
Now, none of these arrows have dollar values on them, which is a little bit frustrating for me. And Nvidia has so much money that, what else are they going to do? Their price is so inflated. Their stock is worth so much, and they have so much money.
But the web of relationships between OpenAI, NVIDIA, Oracle, and all of these other hyperscaler companies, Microsoft is in the mix, all of these companies are, and you look at this chart with the different lines connecting them, I'm investing in you, and you're turning around and using most of that investment to pay me for my NVIDIA chip, for my OpenAI LLM API access. It is this giant self-dealing web of financial ties, and I don't know why that's every time this happens, it leads to a massive collapse. I don't get it. I don't get why this chart isn't terrifying to everybody, and yet all of their stocks continue to. It's crazy.
Yeah, you and I talk about it a lot, right? The domino effect. You see the domino effect
Right.
in the economy and sectors that fail impacting other sectors, but also at the tiniest level, the relationships between these companies is scary, right? One node fails, but the 7 after it lower down,
Yep.
right? The suppliers, they fail too, right?
Yep. At the start of 2026, cracks have started to appear in all of this. So both Money and the Wall Street Journal reported on the underperformance of the Magnificent 7 stocks in the later half of 2025. And I think the market is starting to realize, hey, wait a sec, some of these numbers are kind of concerning. And I think one of the most interesting things that just happened was Microsoft announced that 45% of its unpaid revenue commitments are all tied to OpenAI and basically wiped out 12% of their market value in a week, because people are realizing, yeah, wait a second, you have basically promised us that this revenue is coming from OpenAI, who is not yet profitable, and now you're saying nearly half of your revenue commitments are coming from this other single source. Again, all your eggs in this one basket. And that's crazy. It is this idea that we are going to make this one big bet. I think people are correctly starting to question this, right? So this is a quote from Ruchir Sharma for the Financial Times, that the questions that people are starting to ask NVIDIA and others, things like hardware depreciation. Hardware depreciation is a legitimate thing that you have to bake into all of your business. As a startup of 35 people, we had to bake in hardware depreciation into our tax liability and a bunch of things. And NVIDIA started to do some weird things, talking about how the time period for their hardware, for their GPUs, was now 6 years instead of 3 years, and trying to smear out some of these problems. And basically, it is finally causing people to ask some questions. And we are, as this guy from the Financial Times says, America has become one big bet on AI. And that seems bad, guys. That seems back to our original point of the entire economy is this 3-legged stool. You are spending because you're in the top 20%, because your stocks are inflated by this giant AI mirage. If everything we just talked about with the AI is creating a bubble and creating a misleading concept, then you now have all of these dangerous dependencies. You are now living high on the hog in the 20% because you think everything in the stock market is going well. Well, the stock market is only going well because AI is inflating our perceptions of the stock market. And AI has a high value in the stock market because you in the top 20% have confidence in it. It's this constant cycle. And the bottom 80% get none of these benefits. All AI is doing is threatening to wipe out their jobs even more. And it's just this bizarre, precarious economy where this AI bubble is propping everything up. And I go back to Diane Swonk, the chief economist at KPMG, talking to Fortune, basically saying a negative shock is going to ruin 2/3 of the economy. So a single fracture in AI causes a fracture in the stock market, causes a fracture in the top 20%. Having confidence in their wealth causes them to spend less. All of these things tie together. And I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do when the stool collapses. And this is what I'm trying to get us to is this idea of everyone talks about the K-shaped economy and seems kind of like, oh, it's, what should we do about this divergence? It's worse. It's worse than the divergence. You guys aren't anticipating what happens when AI possibly breaks. And now I'm betting on AI being successful. I fucking hate AI. Why would I want it to be successful? But it's terrifying. And I don't want to end this episode on a bummer. I think we should talk about, other than we all storm Mark Zuckerberg's house and drag him out into the streets, what do we do? What do we do?
Yeah, and that we talked about that earlier, right? That's the challenge. Like guys like us are sort of always watching for the opportunities in the economy because we're startup guys. But we can quite easily go into an enterprise and also be sort of startup guys there too. But it's getting harder and harder. And in the big companies, a lot of my network are now saying, like, where's it going? And I'm like, not only from a business point of view, am I in the pessimistic column, but on the technology side, I'm like, and by the way, like, I'm not seeing all of these patterns. And I'm not seeing the revenue model and how we're going to have agentic AI just proliferate the internet and the interfaces for that. And then also all of these companies who are going to suffer because all they really did was build an API over the top of somebody else, a platform over the top of somebody else's API. I can't see it. It's just like a mess because I'm like, maybe that domino doesn't fall, but something else causes these other dominoes to fall. There's no way to sort of see even the demise. The housing industry, you'd be like, okay, cool. It's going to be a mess. But I feel like logically there was a way to, hey, we can bail all these people out. And yeah, all you guys at the bottom, the 80%, yeah, you're all going to keep suffering. But we can rescue the guys who screwed up. I don't know what kind of bailout we're going to need if you and I are correct in that. Oh, not necessarily correct because we hope it's not right. But if this thing goes south before it goes north, that's a very interesting type of bailout because you're talking about now bailing out a lot of the 80%.
Right.
Which we don't seem to have in our DNA as a very conservative. That's not our thing.
Right. Well, and
drive, you know?
I think there's probably we end up covering this in more detail on a breaking news episode, but there is very recently in the last week, Anthropic dropped that app using Claude to go and do legal research, and immediately the entire stock market realized, oh, wait a second, these companies are going to go put 40 of my portfolio companies out of business because there's hundreds of SaaS companies offering a niche solution and making money on that niche solution. And now one of the Magnificent Seven can come along and in 6 weeks have their AI write a competing solution, undercharge you for it because all of it's funny money right now. And the stock market then corrected itself, and the buy the dip people drove it to 50,000 is what it closed over for the first time ever after massive plunges. So the roller coaster of the stock market seems to be trying to insulate itself from the AI shocks. And you can look at it and say, well, all those companies lost their value, but then a bunch of people buying the dip recouped their value. So it's this weird roller coaster of maybe this shock never shows up because somehow this stock market people have infinite money to keep passing around between one another. But that seems risky and scary for the rest of us.
Yeah, there it is. It's going to be interesting, right?
Uh-huh.
It's an interesting time period where the historians of the future are going to be looking back and be like, wow, that was the fork in the road where it all changed, because I do think there's a fundamental shift coming, right? And I was talking to some of my conservative friends about this, where I said, look, we've done a really good job of a political game, which is to take the masses along is communism, socialism, and we've done a really good job of sort of representing that at the economic level. But then throughout every other area of being an American, it's not in our DNA. Leave no American left behind, like both as an education and as a military concept. But we don't have that same philosophy about business. It trickle down was supposed to be it, but come on, conservatives, we know it doesn't work. I like to joke, in some alternate timeline, the companies did right, and all these CAOs and board members were super conscientious and didn't care about the stock price, and they did profit sharing. No, that's not happening. So it's interesting for me, where I'm looking as a conservative saying, well, one of the biggest solutions is to embrace post-scarcity, right? Which is everybody gets a house, everybody gets educated, everybody gets fed, everybody gets healthcare. The worst conditions, you'll probably die, but you're the sacrifice, right? But the majority of people don't sleep on the streets, they're not hungry. We don't have 14% of the population in the richest country in the world, allegedly, right? We don't have 14% of the population and the kids hungry. Like, weird time.
And the problem is no one has the plan for how you go from today to that without the billionaires vetoing it with all of their bought and paid for politicians. Like, it's just, I'm trying to figure out how not to end this episode on a bummer. But it is like, I need everyone to be open-eyed about what's going on. And I don't know, man.
There's a great scene in Newsroom where they have the climate guy on who works for Obama, and he's sort of delivering this doom and gloom, and the news guy says to him, like, we're going into the weekend. Can you give us some positive news? And he says, well, yeah. If we cut emissions and we do this and we do this, it's still too late. There's nothing we can do. And it's like, we're getting really close, because these things don't turn around in 6 months, right? Like, and there is an element to my worry is this is an economic challenge. Capitalism's about to change on a dime. And unfortunately, I don't want to call it my party because it's not my party, but unfortunately, the people who represent my party now as conservatives will make it a politicized argument until the pitchforks come out, right? And then it becomes the tension on the streets. Every protest becomes a little bit more heated because it's about good values, which we don't have at the very highest levels of government anymore. But also people being hungry and not being able to make they're going to recognize. And so there is a genuine worry that the term we use, right, the sting and the gap.
Yeah.
How bad is the sting? Is it really a sting, or are you and I being sort of super conservative over the term? Is it much heavier than a sting?
Right. Yeah. No, it is. I genuinely, if you're Sam Altman, if you're Mark Zuckerberg, if you're Peter Thiel, you have your bunkers in New Zealand that you're planning to fuck off to and leave the rest of us to deal with the aftermath of it. And like, I don't understand. You all had better hope you make it to the private jet, because like, it's not good if this isn't the type of thing where like, oh, the steel workers were out of work and it was an increase from, 6 to 8% unemployment. You guys are headed on a trajectory to put 30% of people out of work at bare minimum. What do you think happens then, man?
Yeah. And the other thing too is what they don't realize, Zuckerberg, you are going to need ventilation
in your private bunker.
When you get to your private, we got bulldozers and we got gas, and it's cheaper now. So like, it ain't gonna save them, right? Like,
no, Right.
And you know, this is throughout time. I'm really fascinated by dictators who get overthrown, and I go through cycles like Petrescu in Romania, and I love watching their demise, right? And secretly, the little pessimist in me is hoping like some president eventually calls that bluff and is like, nope, we won all of the taxes. Like,
Right.
you threaten to go, but you're consuming. Nothing you make will be bought over here.
Right.
Nothing
Yeah,
will. There'll be
I don't,
no investment. Like, I want somebody to call that bluff, even if
Yeah.
it quickens up the sting. You know what? I'd rather the sting be self-inflicted than because we had
Right.
no power to control capitalism.
I mean, I will say the number of people who have left California and then realized, Dallas fucking sucks. Actually,
Yeah.
wait a sec. Can I go back to California? And it's like, sure, here are the terms.
Hey,
Like,
I heard some good things
yeah.
about Austin, Texas. Uber driver told me it's like Willie Nelson had a baby with a hippie.
Sure. Yeah.
So, bunch of libs surrounded by a bunch of reds and
Right.
living in harmony.
Yeah.
So there you go. But yeah, it's
All right.
getting harder and harder to be a conservative and be optimistic about our messaging, because none of the policies are hitting the 80% of the people. Cheaper eggs, fuck off.
Which you haven't done, by the
Make
way.
an omelet with one less egg.
Well, and also, that's not how inflation works, guys. Like, I get that we're all too stupid to understand the economics, but somebody should have been telling you that, like, they're going to make inflation going down is not going to undo the cost of eggs. Like, anyways. All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Acceptance Criteria. To read articles that we've written on similar topics to the ones we talk about here, head over to the blog at acceptancepod.com. And a quick reminder, whether this is your first episode or you've been listening for a while, we wouldn't say no to your going and dropping 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leaving us a nice review. And if you want to leave us a bad review, remember the name of the podcast is Stop Podcasting Yourself. Also, tell your friends if you like the show and that they should check it out. Some of the best podcasts out there go by word of mouth, and we'd much appreciate it.
We're also building a community on Reddit at r/acceptance criteria, or you can find us on Discord. Once there, you'll find links to show notes and other artifacts you'll find on our blog. We promise to moderate the heck out of anything submitted to the team to keep it a nice little slice of the internet.
If you've got a topic you'd like to come discuss or rant about, drop us a note and we'll see if we can get you on a future episode. You can go to acceptancepod.com/guest and submit your ideas. Also, don't forget you can follow us on most apps. We're at AcceptancePod. We'll post links to show notes and any articles from the blog over there.
And a friendly reminder that we are always interested in hearing questions directly from you, our listeners, especially for our segment User Stories. If you've got a scenario you'd like help with, whether it's working with a problematic engineering or product team member, trying to navigate the never-ending pitfalls with agile processes, or you just can't understand why your favorite app is evolving away from what drew you to it in the first place, Quora, we're here to talk it through with you. You can send those questions to acceptancepod@gmail.com or submit them on the Discord in the User Stories channel, and we might be able to help on a future episode. And we're happy to keep it anonymous so no one can trace it back to you if you end up shit-talking a coworker or something.
For now, I'm Kevin Thomas Euland, and you can find me on most apps at kthomaseuland. That's ULLAND.
And I'm Andrew Greener, and you can find me on most apps at Criteria Greener. That's GREINER, and this has been Acceptance Criteria. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you.